I'm incredibly pumped for Veilguard. We just got an in-depth and overly detailed look at character builds and higher level warrior champion gameplay. This video will be going through abilities, how runes give you more abilities, items, the skill tree, ultimates, basic combat, advanced combat such as priming and detonating targets, companions, how they work together. There's even us punting enemies off cliffs and doing Captain America style shield throws and much more. Here's an example that really sold it to me. Turns out the background choice you can make for your character at character creation modifies your character's skills and doesn't just affect dialogue. It also influences bonuses from gear, so there'll be a ton of replayability from the get-go. So let's start from the start, an in-depth deep dive into the character's build before we show the gameplay action. This is our Rook, a warrior class of the elf race with a Grey Warden background, or faction if you will. Like mentioned, the background is actually much more important than we thought. It's something you'll need to think about, so sorry ladies, your past does define you. I kid, but what I'm not kidding about is how excited I am to see just how many customization options we get. On the surface, we can see the two weapon slots. We get a helm slot and a armor slot. We also get 4 accessory slots, and to the right, runes, which we'll go through soon. On the left, we see our level, as well as summarized attack and defense. On the bottom is your 4 currently slotted abilities. Before you lose your minds about only having 4, there's a ton more actual abilities you can use in the game, so stop writing that essay and listen up. First though, we see some example warrior abilities. Diving Kick. It's a smash control type ability that does 471 physical damage at this level. It costs 1 pip of a warrior resource called Rage, which builds up when you take or deal damage. Most interestingly, it's a detonator ability, detonating weakened enemies, so if you have some way to apply the weakened effect or have a companion that can, you'll be doing big damage. More on this mechanic soon. As it turns out, one of the runes we have equipped applies the effect to enemies around you, letting you self-combo. Later on, we'll see it in action to great effect. Next is Grappling Spear, a projectile control type ability that does a higher amount of fire damage, meaning that if your build focuses on doing fire damage, this will be improved. Spoiler, this whole build focuses on fire damage. Sorry I spoiled everything, you might as well click off the video now. But instead of this ability using Rage, it has a long 60-second cooldown. It applies the status effect Overwhelm to the enemy. Overwhelm makes enemies more vulnerable to stagger, which we'll go through soon. But think of it this way, it's like forcing the enemies to have a panic attack. They're much less threatening if you can detonate the effect by handing them a paper bag. Then we have Spectral Bulwark, a smash duration type ability. It deals the lowest amount of damage so far, 377 necrotic damage. It also has a 60-second cooldown. However, it seems like a mostly defensive move as it protects you from the next melee attack and retaliates by knocking them back. The last ability is an ultimate, Warden's Fire. This warrior is the specialization called Champion, and each specialization has their own unique ultimate. However, these ultimates are different based on your background choice. Grey Wardens, Veil Jumpers, Shadow Dragons, Lords of Fortune, the Morn Watch, and the Antivan Crows are all available to your character at character creation. So yes, this means a ton of replayability. In this case, being a Grey Warden changes the Champion's ultimate to Warden's Fire, a now 2,244 damage fire attack that unleashes a barrage of strikes with the burning strength that resides within every Grey Warden. I really wish Duncan knew he could do this. So you can unleash an ultimate when you build up enough charge. Next we have runes. These can be equipped to supplement your build. They're essentially gems that have activated abilities along with passives. For example, the Mend rune lets your warrior self-heal. The active consumes all your warrior's rage and heals accordingly to how much was consumed. Much like my Nonna's pasta bake, it clears my man rage right up but also increases my weight stat. It's actually a problem and really need to work on that, but it also gives them 10% more incoming heals. So Bellara or however you pronounce it will be able to keep you topped up easier with her heal ability. There's seemingly a ton of runes to complement your playstyle. Upend boosts your elemental resistances both actively and passively. Crystallize just straight up freezes all enemies within 10 meters, so it's like you have a Frost Nova on your person, which is more or less another ability. Passively, it boosts frozen duration by 10%. It seems great for a freeze plus shadow build. Next is Diminish, the rune that weakens all enemies within 6 meters. It also increases primer duration by 10%. The weakened effect is a primer, so is Frozen. All of these have obvious synergies together. Now, the biggest synergy piece is Scorch. It makes it so all your weapon attacks deal fire damage for 20 seconds, which in many cases is the full duration of a skirmish. You also deal 10% more fire damage overall, and like I mentioned, this build is leaning into fire damage, which makes this rune perfect, which is what you would be if you liked and subscribed. Next, we get a great look at the skill tree. You start in the middle and invest points in any direction. There are different kinds of nodes, some passive, some skills, some major changes, and so on. In this case, we traveled out to the champion specialization. Putting a point in the node immediately grants you the ultimate we talked about. What's notable though is that the ultimate's text is modified to mention your background, saying it's the pinnacle of Grey Warden combat prowess. So if you're a real immersion nut, you'll appreciate the flavor, which is probably similar to Almond, not a crowd pleaser, but I'm glad it exists. You can also hover over specializations before you invest to see what they do with handy video examples, though you can respec, so don't think you're locked in. The champion specialization is set to favor strong defensive skills. One such greater passive node gives you 20% extra defense when wearing a heavy helm and armor. You're also less likely to be disrupted when hit. Leaning more into our fire build, we have the next greater passive node, Fiery Resolve, which grants you flaming weapons when you parry an incoming attack. Flaming weapons also last 50% longer. That combos with your gem that also grants you the effect. Between them both, you're able to consistently keep your weapons hot. But if you're hot, you do bonus damage to Darkspawn, who are vulnerable to fire. Hence why I believe the Grey Warden background will add fire effects to ultimates across all classes and specializations, but we'll have to wait and see. Now we take a look at gear. Keep in mind we want heavy armor to take advantage of the passive. This is a rare heavy helm, so not great quality, but still gives a lot of stats. Armor, ability damage, but also extra stagger effect and extra takedown damage. What's most interesting is the next locked effect, an extra 10% stagger relative to your Lords of Fortune allied strength. Lords of Fortune is a background choice and also the faction of your companion Tash. We can't be sure exactly what this means and how it unlocks, but what we know is that there is gear that gets bonuses based on what your background choice is. So in Veilguard, your background really matters. Perhaps the bonus gets bigger if you have Tash on your squad as well, but I hope not, as I want to be able to pick a background without being forced to use a particular companion. Perhaps you can get the bonus dagger effect on the helm without being Lords of Fortune because your reputation with them is what governs the bonus. The armor has defense and ability damage as well as necrotic resistance and a boost to max resistance. It also has a locked symbol giving immunity to the effect. Perhaps the gear needs to be upgraded to unlock these. Moving over to your shield, it actually provides damage, which makes sense later on using heavy attacks. It has a stagger rating and provides a little bump in necrotic damage. It also gives +1 shield toss bounces and has a locked bonus, which gives your fully charged shield toss the ability to apply necrosis to the first target hit. It's also mentioned you can use two-handed weapons, but they have less defensive options. Your weapon is the Spellbound Longsword, which also has damage and stagger. However, it lets you deal 40 more fire damage and gain flaming weapon on kills with it, yet another way to keep the flame burning. The locked stat is interesting in that half your fire resistance is added to damage of your flaming weapons. There really seems like there will be a ton of build diversity, as that in itself would make you actually want to pick up fire resistance. Let's look at our accessories next. The first is a unique item, Andraste's Will. It gives +3 to burning stacks, and all afflictions that you apply are applied as burning instead, meaning those two runes that apply frozen and weakened, well, they now burn. Absolutely unreal, though unfortunately we don't see this in action, but expect to see the freeze and weakening rune used soon. Your next ring is uncommon and just gives you extra stagger, which I'll explain soon. It has 2 locked effects for stagger duration and takedown damage. The amulet gives more duration on your enhanced damage effect, which Lucanus can graciously apply to you with one of his skills. Speaking of companions, let's look at Davrin, who is also a Grey Warden. You can sneakily see his skill tree to the right, which is smaller than Rook's, but still fairly decently sized. You get skill points for leveling up their relationships with you, so good friends will be more powerful. His weapon, Blight Killer, lets him debuff an enemy and also make the target more vulnerable to fire, comboing well with the fire build we have going on. His shield further buffs the debuff ability by applying Taunted to the target, forcing them to attack Davrin. You'll see here you can also kit your companions out with weapons and 1 gear piece. Moving on, we see our companion selection screen. You can see that Davrin applies Overwhelm and detonates Weakened, so at a glance you'll know what companions do without upgrades. The particular quest we're on requires Davrin, so we're forced to select him. I won't spoil what it's about just in case. Some of Davrin's skills bring out a cute baby griffin, however we can select a second companion too. Emmerich is a choice if we want more minions, as he's a necromancer that applies Weakened and detonates Sundered. So Davrin and him would work well, as Davrin can detonate the weakened effect that Emmerich applies. We can also sneakily see that Walking Bomb is on his skill bar. He's a very tempting bring along because of that. We could also pick up Harding, as she applies Sundered and detonates Overwhelmed, so yeah, her and Davrin would work well together. As would we, as champions have a lot of Overwhelm effect appliers. However, we'll be locking in Lucanus, a swift and precise assassin with a demonic aura. He detonates Overwhelmed at a base, so he works well with Davrin and Rook, but he doesn't apply any primers without upgrades, so let's jump into the combat basics. Immediately we see a dragon. It looks much more terrifying than the ones in Inquisition. Someone tell her that the background choices matter and her color should change accordingly. Unfortunately, today we're just fighting Darkspawn. We jump into the tactical menu and highlight one of them, a Greater Ghoul. It's vulnerable to fire, like we mentioned before, and resistant to necrotic. The abilities will pulse with a green outline when it's effective against an enemy, which is extremely useful. It also points out combo opportunities, in this case with the Overwhelmed status. So both Rook and Lucanus jump in. You'll notice Lucanus' demonic wings as he does so. These are your basic attacks and the character rolls. Then we see a Herlock Spiker, a ranged Darkspawn. Prepare yourself for frustrating combat plays, in that whoever is piloting this Rook doesn't do a very good job fighting. I wonder if it's the same person who was missing all their arrow shots in the first gameplay reveal, though perhaps it's on purpose to demonstrate their skills. When you have the opportunity to counter, a spider sense like halo effect will appear above your head. The parry was successful, but Rook also takes an attack from the Spiker, which was well telegraphed on the ground before it hit. But remember, because of our build, successful parries will light your weapon on fire, so Rook goes about dispatching the grunts with effective flame swings and even a strike from the shield. You'll also see her raise her shield to block some incoming damage. What Lucanus completely ruins is the view of Rook using the kick ability to punt an enemy off the edge, instantly killing it.
What the what do you mean? How have you... Ah, man. You're just ruining it. Look at my lips. You're ruining it. Ruining the fun for the next man.
Rook then starts charging her shield throw. You can see it has two stages just to the left of the abilities. It can be used over and over since it has relatively no cooldown, meaning there will be Captain America style builds out there. I'd be screaming, I can do this all day, over and over after each kill. Now we see how you issue orders to your companions, which is very standard BioWare. Telling Lucanus to attack the Greater Ghoul you have highlighted, and telling Davrin to keep the Greater Herlock busy. It has a yellow health bar, which means armor. It'll need to be removed before you damage its health. Armor is resistant to most attacks. Heavy attacks are best at removing it, though it seems unlike Mass Effect. Armor doesn't stop ability effects like knockback, for example. Then we unpause, jump and attack. A few swings, a backstep and a shield throw. So you can tap it to send it out right away, and it bounces between targets. Since there are a lot of enemies, Rook casts Spectral Bulwark, which we saw the description of before. It deals necrotic damage to those who land melee hits on you. The Greater Herlock attacks with its axe and is propelled back along with his friends. The footage cuts away to the next area and a shield throw to get the attention of an enemy. Now it's time to see what stagger is. The so-called lavender bar above their health are just called purple is the stagger effect. When the bar fills completely, they are staggered and take bonus damage. Without a dedicated stagger build or stagger items, this bar may build up too slowly on some enemies to use before they die. So Rook parries, attacks, and ultimately fills the bar. Yes, it seems champions are good at staggering enemies. You can deliver a takedown when they're in this state, aka finishing moves are back, baby. Unlike Origins, you have to activate it. Notice on the left it clearly displays what buffs and debuffs you have on you. I prefer this to the tiny icons that games usually provide you, but no doubt we can customize this to our liking. Now let's get a little more into it. Rook leaps in and starts attacking. Similar to before, the pilot positions themselves between two enemies. Sun Tzu would be very disappointed. However, they use a shield slam-like attack that propels both Darkspawn away. She's disrupted by an attack from a ranged darkspawn in the distance, so she pops a potion and opens the ability wheel to cast Titan Stomp, which both applies a high stagger and overwhelm, as well as damage enemies in an AoE, taking off around half their HP and overwhelming them all, not to mention knocking them down, which isn't mentioned on the skill. Seems like a very effective method of crowd control. But what about your companions? Well, Lucanus is told to cast Adrenaline Rush, which enhances your team's damage stats by applying the Enhanced Damage effect. This effect is boosted by the ring we saw before. It has a cool effect of making your character proudly raise their shield. Now it's time for Davrin to use his Overwhelming Strike, which applies Overwhelmed to an enemy. So everyone is all about that stagger. This build also activates the Shield Volley passive, which ricochets your shield 3 times if you hit an enemy with a heavy attack. So Rook rolls back and throws the shield. Now we tell Lucanus to cast Abominate, a necrotic damaging ability that deals high barrier damage and applies knockdown to enemies in the area. He jumps up and attacks, but the player had targeted a fairly alone darkspawn and only it falls over. Then Rook starts using their heavy attack, which utilizes the shield to bash in the armor of the Hurlock. It also knocks them fairly far back, even with armor still up. We pause the action and see Davrin's Battle Cry ability being highlighted, which taunts all enemies in the area. However, we want to cast his Death from Above, which is ranged. It deals fire damage, high stagger, and detonates the weakened effect. This is his Griffin swooping in and attacking the target. It seems Davrin has skills that summon in the Griffin rather than it being like a minion. This is my biggest disappointment of the reveal. I would have preferred it being a companion. However, we need to use more ranged attacks, so let's use that Grappling Spear ability we saw highlighted before. It does a lot of damage and you can follow up attack after it pulls them in. The follow-up attack sends the Darkspawn flying. It seems Bioware have no issue with you knocking around enemies like you're a powerful earth-shattering warrior. But what is most fun is priming and detonating. If you ever played Mass Effect 3 or Andromeda, you'll be familiar with this mechanic. So let's look at that along with the ultimates. Doors opened, let's shield walk towards enemies. Your companions jump in and we tactically pause. Let's use Davrin's Battle Cry from before to taunt all the enemies. He gets it off, and while they're taunted, we can use Grappling Spear to pull an enemy to us. Remember that crystallized rune before? Let's use it to freeze all those clumped up enemies. This is essentially another ability we have access to, as it's clearly the most flashy ability we've seen yet. Now remember, we overwhelmed that Hurlock Spiker before with the grapple. Well, now it's time to detonate it. Lucanus' Eviscerate ability does just that. It won't get the bonus damage it normally gets if the target is below half health, but we're using it for the detonation. He uses it and bam, the target starts glowing and then explodes, damaging all around it. Now it's just cleanup time, so use your basics until it's time to cast your ultimate. With a blow of the horn, arrows rain down and it's followed up by what looks to be an explosive stone from a catapult. It takes out all the basic enemies easily, with the Hurlock narrowly avoiding the effect. Remember, this is the Grey Warden modified version of the champion's ultimate, if I haven't reminded you enough. Now it's time to see them all in action together, so we pause, Grappling Spear one enemy, get Lucanus to buff us, and Davrin to Death from Above another enemy. Our spear takes it out and our companions are distracting other enemies. We're free to freeze all those around us and continue damaging, casting our defensive bulwark. Then raising our shield to an attack, which also sets off the bulwark effect and pushes back a big Hurlock. We jump attack the Hurlock, then charge a light attack, which has a nice sound effect indication while doing so. Another jump attack to push the Hurlock off us as we take on another enemy. This time dodging out of the way of a telegraph attack, all the while using fire damage to take these enemies on. Another jump attack and Rook orders both companions to attack the Darkspawn up high. Some more heavy attacks and rolls, and it's time for another heroic strike on the Greater Hurlock, followed by an Eviscerate by Lucanus. Both of these together will apply and detonate the effect. The combo explodes and both of these companions together is enough to handle this monster, but we decide to help out anyway. Oh wait, nah, they'll be fine, let's leave them. Time to explode some barrels no one is near. Nice. This is the first parry we get a good look at, and it comes with a satisfying ting sound effect to let you know you did it. We then cast the Diminish rune, which weakens the enemy. We get a bit cocky and almost die to a ranged attack. clutch heal saves us, we finish the encounter off with a final detonation bang. So that's all the champion gameplay we have access to. So what did we just see and are seeing now? Well, the 4 core moves that all 3 classes share are jump, dodge, light attack, and heavy attack, which can all be chained together. Rook can dodge at any time, even mid-attack, which adds fluidity to combat. Is taking damage or dealing it better at that moment? Light attacks do quick damage and build up small amounts of stagger, heavy attacks are slower but build up more stagger to your opponent. Once enough stagger is built, the enemy will be rendered more vulnerable to all incoming damage, and it allows Rook to perform a takedown. Each of these attacks, light and heavy, can be charged by holding down the button to deliver a more potent version of the strike. For example, a heavy attack can be charged while using a staff to unleash a magical wave of destructive energy. We saw this in my last video on the mage. Attacks can also be triggered while sprinting and or jumping to add depth and fluidity to combat. We saw that the player loved using their jump attacks. In addition, each class has ranged attacks, blocks, or parries if timed properly with the right weapon set, and the ability to control companions' combat strategy. Each class also has 2 distinct weapon sets, which can be swapped seamlessly in the heat of battle. This drastically changes the available movesets and strategies. Heavy attacks remove armor barrier, denoted by a yellow bar, faster, and range attacks remove shield barrier, denoted by a blue bar, faster. There's also the stagger meter, denoted by a lavender bar, which builds as hits are landed against an enemy. Stagger creates opportunities for bonus damage and special takedowns. Players can use the ability wheel to assign companions to attack a specific enemy, individually or together. Abilities can also be bound to shortcut keys to keep the action flow going, instead of always bringing up the ability wheel. Vulnerabilities and resistances of enemies can be seen while targeting enemies in the ability wheel. For example, Darkspawn are weak to fire damage. Abilities require class resources, mana, momentum, and rage to be able to use. Each class primarily builds up their class resource by dealing damage with their basic attacks. In addition, each class has a secondary way to build their class resource. Warriors build rage by taking and dealing damage, rogues build momentum by dodging attacks and parrying successfully, and mages retain mana passively over time. Warriors who go into battle with a sword and shield build will have access to the shield throw volley. By landing a heavy attack on a shield throw return, the shield will ricochet, taking out multiple enemies. This sequence can repeat up to 3 times, causing a devastating ring of damage around Rook. This attack works well against swarms as well as distant adversaries. Other ways to manage distant enemies lean into companion abilities, such as Davrin's Death from Above or send to Asan his Griffin to attack enemies. Warriors also have the Grappling Spear ability to pull enemies close for an easier victory. With these tools, attacks can be chosen based on the type of enemy and situation to dispatch foes in the most optimal way, especially on higher difficulties. Finally, you have your most powerful attack, Rook's class ultimate ability. Doing damage to enemies increases your ultimate meter. The meter won't fully fill during smaller skirmishes because they are designed to decimate a single swath of enemies in the battlefield or the toughest bosses. So we got a good look at the champion, but there are other specializations. These are the most recently updated descriptions. In terms of warriors, we have the Reaper. Become Knight's Blade, steal life and risk death to gain incredible unnatural abilities. Slayer. Leap into the fray, wield massive punishing weapons while rushing enemies to deal devastating blows. Champion, which we just saw, be the shield, shrug off damage while summoning righteous fire down on enemies. Then we have the Rogue, which has Duelist. Draw your steel, parry and dodge past enemies to gain strength with every strike. Saboteur, set the stage, deploy explosives and turrets to devastate enemies and then pick them off with arrows. Veil Jumper, hunt the enemy, snipe enemies from afar using artifacts that charge arrows with dangerous, powerful magic. Then we have the mage specializations. We have Death Caller, embrace the dark, drain life from enemies and cast spells that wreathe with the essence of death itself. Invoker, call the void, freeze enemies in their tracks, then summon the deepest cold to tear them apart. Spellblade, be the storm, channel potent spells for close quarters combat infused with lightning's wrath. So what do you think? More or less excited for Veilguard? Let me know below. I definitely like what I see. Initially, I was a little surprised at the direction, but the more that's revealed, the more I realize this is an RPG with a faster coat of paint. If you enjoy these videos, I'd appreciate knowing about it or even a sub, as it's always nice when you help drown out the negative. You really want to be subbed to this channel for BioWare stuff. Trust me. Also, I really do appreciate you. Thank you so much, and for everything RPG, you're in the right place. Ciao, friends.